Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 44 of Into the Fire, coming to you live from windy Tulsa, Oklahoma tonight. We're having wind gusts that are, man, I don't know, they're like 50 to 60 miles an hour. It looks like there's smoke in the air. We're apparently on a high fire danger. I don't know what's going on, but I think that the weather is going to be really, really interesting for the central and eastern part of the country over the next 3 days. I guess there's a really high tornado possibility, etc. Danny, what's up, buddy? Nice to see you. I'm seeing Catch You 77. I don't know who that is exactly off the top of my head, but I'm glad you're here. And Phyllis and all the others that are here, thank you for showing up tonight. Those of you that catch this a little bit later on, feel free. You can drop by my YouTube page at Detective Jason White. You can catch us on YouTube, KGRA's YouTube page. You can go to Rumble. They're going to keep these episodes up there, so that's great. I love it. And I just welcome everybody here tonight. We're going to give this a shot. These two guys are coming to us from North Carolina, up in the mountains in a remote location. And so we've had a few little technical issues as far as lagging, etc. But we're going to talk child exploitation, which is an area that I'm not an expert at by any stretch. So this is going to be interesting for me. I'm excited to hear about it. And I wanted to mention real quick too, if we happen to have lags where they happen to drop out or something, I'm going to just have to add libs. But man, we got some epic, and I mean epic guests coming, including these guys. But we have some epic guests that are coming our way over the next, well, through May. And I've got it scheduled through May, and it's going to be just fantastic. Next week, just to mention Billy Queen, who was an undercover ATF agent that infiltrated the Mongols motorcycle gang and became a full patch member. There was somebody I heard on another podcast that said that if there was a Mount Rushmore of undercover people, he's one of them. And so I'm really stoked to have him, and I don't want to tell the others, but that's the one that's going to be for next week, and I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it. Let me get to these guys' bios, and like I said, we may run across a little bit of a freeze here and there. Hopefully not. They were kind of experiencing that a little bit. We got two guests tonight. They're here together. The first guest is going to be Zachary Neefe, and I hope I'm not saying that wrong. He is a criminal investigator with Homeland Security Investigations. In Greensboro, North Carolina, and he's responsible for 14 counties in central North Carolina, including the 4-county area covered by the Invictus Child Exploitation Task Force. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about, is this Invictus Task Force. That's interesting, and I'd never heard of it, so we're going to talk a little bit about that to maybe inspire other places across the country. He's a special agent in HSI's full-time representative to the ITF and specializes in proactive online investigations targeting child sexual abuse material distribution, traveler/online enticement cases, and providing investigative support and resources to state and local internet crimes against children affiliates. You can follow him on LinkedIn, on his LinkedIn page, and look him up under Zachary Neefe in the event that you have further questions down the line. The second guest is going to be Ray Dawson, who's a sworn detective with the Randolph County Sheriff's Office. He's assigned to the Invictus Task Force. Ray is a digital forensic examiner, analyst, and investigator. He is a member of the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation's Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, also known as ICAC. The North Carolina Human Trafficking Demand Reduction Task Force. Ray currently resides in central North Carolina with his wife and has worked in the ministry since 2006 with a focus on international counter human trafficking that began in 2015. And in 2021, he's one of the founders of this. He founded the Invictus Project, which is a 503c3 nonprofit. 501c3, I said that wrong, nonprofit to combat the domestic trafficking and sexual exploitation of children. He's a veteran of the U.S. Army, thank you for that, and has worked as a military contractor for the U.S. Army Special Operations Community since 2011. Man, if I thought I was impressive, these guys are blowing me out of the water. And let's bring them both in, Amanda. Hey, guys. Thank you for being here. Listen, I appreciate—
Thanks for having us.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Just tell us briefly, one of you start off and tell me, because I want to dive into this here in a minute about Invictus, Ray. So Zach, why don't you tell me, first of all, when I first reached out to you, you're kind of like you both are, but tell me a little bit about child exploitation. What is that really? Because what I think about is Catching a Predator, that show that was on Dateline or one of those shows back in the day. So tell me a little bit about what child exploitation, that specialty, is all about.
Sure, and I hope it comes through. Thank you for having us. The ICAC task force is made up of 61 federally funded task forces across the United States. It's a federal program. However, most of the ICAC task forces are either state or local led. So the money comes from the federal government to investigate cyber tips that are disseminated out by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization started by John Walsh after his son Adam was abducted back in the 80s. Originally, the purview of NCMEC was for missing kids, the milk box kids back in the day. And since then, NCMEC has become the clearinghouse for these cyber tips. So Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, any of your major US-based companies, TikTok, which is at least partially in the US, they're obligated, if they do business in the United States, to report to NCMEC. If there's something bad that happens to kids online, whether it's sextortion, child sexual abuse material, which is also called child pornography, if there's online enticement activity where an adult's contacting a kid, tip is submitted by the electronic service provider to NCMEC, and then it goes to the ICAC task force. Before I started at HSI, I was an ICAC affiliate, and what that means is I was an investigator that worked for, at the time, a sheriff's office. But most of your ICAC affiliate members are either at a local department or at a sheriff's office, and they receive the tips that come from their ICAC task force in their state. So a typical tip will come in. It might be, again, we'll say from Facebook, just as an example. Tip involves an adult reaching out to a child. The investigator is going to serve legal process to identify who the bad guy might be or who the child victim might be, and then run down any leads on identifying that suspect and identifying the one as well. So that's just an overview of what the ICAC program does, and the Invictus Task Force serves to augment that in our local area.
Yeah. And that's something I want to dive into here, Ray, is your program that you founded, and it's called Invictus. I had never heard of that, and I'm really interested. And I could tell I was researching a little bit, watching one of the other conferences that you guys have on YouTube. And on that, you kind of dove into some of the statistical data too. So when you're telling me about Invictus, I wouldn't mind hearing some of the statistics as far as the increase in this area of crime.
Yeah, sure. So to kind of echo what Zach said, thanks for having us. So I was working internationally with some organizations in the counter trafficking space. I felt like I was being called and led to try to do something domestically. Really didn't know what that looked like. And so when I became a sworn law enforcement officer, I started working with the investigators and working basically with the child abuse, child sexual abuse, that kind of thing. First time I stumbled upon a cyber crime involving a child, I was with a small agency at the time. They didn't have a lot of resources. And so at that point, I'm like, what are we doing here? They didn't have any tools. They didn't have any resources to be able to properly investigate this crime. Everything had to be shipped off to a third party or a neighboring agency for them to do any investigation on this, on really what the merits of this crime were, because it was all committed online. At that point, I started asking questions, and that's when I became aware of what ICAC is, the Internet Crimes Against Children. And when I started to dive into that, I realized very quickly that this is a huge unguarded flank in the defense of our children. And just to give you an example, and a lot of it is that precursor to all of this was the COVID era. And, when I say that, it's, we're looking at the numbers, and I can speak to North Carolina. In 2019, the state of North Carolina had roughly around 4,900 cyber tips reported to the state of North Carolina, with only about 250 agents that are, I guess, trained and authorized. Zach, spoke about the ICAC affiliate, having those ICAC affiliates that can investigate these. That alone is a pretty overwhelming caseload, just because of the hundreds of man hours and the very technical resources that are needed to investigate these. And that was a 2019 number. What we started to see was this increase through the COVID years, right? So now we're at 2022, and those numbers have increased to over 22,000, and then increased to 28,000 in 2023, and just are continued to increase. We had almost 30,000 reported cyber tips in the state of North Carolina in 2024. That's roughly about a 560% increase in these crimes.
Wow.
We realized very quickly that this was a space that law enforcement needed help in. They needed resources. And so that's where we, started the Invictus Project in 2021 to be able to partner with law enforcement to help supplement some of these investigative tools and resources that are needed, and to be a force multiplier. I myself am also an investigator with our Invictus Task Force.
Do you think that in part some of this, that you're getting increased tips because people are becoming aware of your organization and how to get in touch with you, or is it just really just exploded where there's that much more of this going on?
Well, I think it's that there's been a big social shift, right? One of the things that the nonprofit does in partnership with law enforcement is we have a huge educational component. And because of that, we want to sound an alarm to parents and to our people that are in position of trust, our school teachers. And so in order to do that, we have to accurately reflect what this problem looks like. And we are able to, because our task force has about 14 members right now that are seated investigators in the task force, along with a intelligence analyst full-time dedicated to the task force, and a digital forensic examiner that is dedicated to the task force full-time. And so we're collecting a lot of data. We investigated last year in 2024 was our first year. We stood the task force up in January 2024. That was our first year proof of concept. We conducted 63 operations and arrested 77 subjects in our very first year. And so with that, I think we investigated 367, I believe, cyber tips that were cleared. And so with that, and that's just on our reactive side, that doesn't include our proactive side, and we can speak to that a little bit later. But what we learned is we have a lot of information, a lot of data. And how do we quantify that data? How do we look at it and go, what's really the problem? And where was this shift? When did this shift happen? And that's why it shifted our focus back to COVID. So what happened during COVID? The United States shut down. We sent all of these kids home with an electronic device. So we had children that were virtually learning from school. They were in school virtually, but not only that, they were not allowed to play. They were not allowed to see their friends. And so they learned to develop relationships online in a virtual environment. And so this type of normalized behavior, or this virtual social interaction, became normalized within our culture. And of course, predators, they just hunt wherever the prey is. And now we're just seeing in large, huge numbers, a generation of young people that are going through puberty. They're growing up online, and these predators are no longer looking at them, looking for them on the playgrounds, because our kids aren't on the playgrounds anymore. So
what's super indicative of that too is the numbers. In talking with our state ICAC commander, if this had been a blip on the radar, the numbers would have come back down.
Right.
And in looking at it, with it being a trend line like it is, once kids were normalized to the relationships online, the numbers haven't come back down. In fact, the cyber tip numbers we're seeing with reported complaints keep going up. Now, you did hit on, has it become an issue of easier to report? That is one thing that we have noticed as well, is that through COVID, through just technology evolving, through some of the social media companies partnering with either nonprofits or technology companies that specialize in detecting bad material on the platforms, the methods by which they're reporting have actually improved. They're not necessarily having to do human review of bad material. They can categorize certain files that have become either known to law enforcement or known to industry partners as being a bad file. And similar to how police match fingerprints at the scene of a crime, these tech companies have learned to match what are called hash values, where a file is cryptographically categorized and mathematically shown almost like a fingerprint for a file. And they use these databases of known hash values with bad files, where they can remove that from their platform a little easier. So there is an element of easier reporting as well.
Yeah. And I'm sure you guys have a little bit of time to maybe monitor the dark web, which is a whole nother nightmare of crazy. And maybe, I'm sure that there's ways of doing that. Hey, just out of curiosity, internationally, you said something about international, Ray. Is this kind of something that the U.S. has cornered the market on, or is this stuff going on to high levels in places like Italy and Greece and, Australia? I'm just curious if is this something that the United States is just really, we just have a lot of sick people here?
Well, I really can't speak to how the cyber tips. I know there is, we have the national NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I know there is an International Center for Missing and Exploited Children where cyber tips are reported as well. Maybe Zach can speak a little bit more to that. When I was working internationally, we were working really with children that were just caught up in generational prostitution, right? The actual contact offense there in those environments. So when I came onto the domestic side, I realized I was living in a fool's paradise because I was unaware of these cyber crimes myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And you guys on this Invictus project, there are many resources that you have within this, some of which are free. Can you touch upon that?
Absolutely. So the website, it's up on the screen. So as Ray mentioned, the Invictus Project is the nonprofit side of the house. The Invictus Task Force is the enforcement side of the house, right? So the Invictus Project, the NGO, aims to educate, advocate, and enforce. The enforcement comes through supplementation and helping, law enforcement with our efforts, as well as Ray, his position being funded as an investigator through the nonprofit, even though he's a sworn investigator and has met all training standards requirements with the state of North Carolina to be a peace officer. But as you mentioned, the education side, which is another one of those parts of the Invictus Project, is resources. One of the things we've been doing that have been hugely effective on our area is education partnerships with schools, nonprofit organizations, churches, where we take an investigator, whether it's Detective Dawson, whether it's myself, whether it's one of our county ICAC Invictus partners that are part of the task force. We take them in with one of the Invictus Project leadership people. Her name's Whitney Miller. She's an educator by profession. And so you take a sworn investigator in with someone that's used to being an educator through school systems and knows the education component for proper presentations for schools, age appropriate type materials, et cetera. And it's been a very good partnership. And what we found with that is Whitney's able to break down the content to a level that teachers are able to understand, students are able to understand, but then having the investigator there, if there ends up being what we call a disclosure or sometimes called an outcry, depending on jurisdiction, basically a kid reporting that something bad has happened to them at home, we're then able to take the report and make an appropriate referral, whether it's a referral for the jurisdiction we're in that we're working, or in some cases we've given safety presentations at neighboring jurisdictions. And so we're then able to make a proper referral, both on the social service side of the house, as well as law enforcement, so that there's access to services and follow-up investigation. Out of those safety presentations, I don't know offhand, I know Ray, maybe you can speak to the statistics, but there's been numerous victims that we've identified just from these safety presentations. And it's hard to quantify when you have a safety presentation that's about just online safety habits, and then a kid comes up at the end and wants to report something that's happened to them that we can then follow up on.
And I think that's why it's important. I think last year we had 8 disclosures during presentations, and it's important to identify that we identified this very, very soon on, that we weren't going to enforce our way out of this problem, right? This was going to take a community to be involved, to be able to reshape the whole social stance that young people have with their social media. And so one of the things that Whitney has done a fantastic job with is that she created a survey. And so she would push this survey out to the school, and it was an anonymous survey, and she would just allow the kids to be able to answer questions that they may not tell a parent or a teacher. And the information that we're finding out is pretty amazing. These kids know it's a problem. They realize that these people are out there. Statistically, they say 1 in 4 children will be sexually solicited online by the time they're 15 years old. I mean, that's incredible. And the research that we're finding out, the information that we're gathering through these presentations and through these surveys that we're doing, is really echoing that statistic, right? So that's an alarming statistic in and of itself. But the Invictus Project, all of the resources that we provide to the community at no cost. That's very, very important, to be able to put a speaker in this space, to be able to, and the resources that we have are really just a collaboration of all the resources that are available. Most parents or folks don't even know what resources are out there that maybe their county offers, or their state offers, or their local churches may offer. And so we work very hard to be able to collaborate those resources, to be able to offer those parents a QR code on a 5x7 piece of paper that they can scan with their phone. And here's these resources that are available if your child makes some kind of disclosure, how to reach out to law enforcement, making ourselves available. But not only that, some of the parenting resources out there, BART Technologies, and some of the books out there that help parents to be able to have those conversations at the appropriate age, the appropriate conversation to prepare that child to navigate through this very technologically advancing culture that we have. Because abstinence is not the solution to technology. It's just not. We got to be able to teach parents how to raise their children to safely navigate this environment.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking to me, I can almost visualize on one of my social media, like on my Facebook or whatever, that all of a sudden I might get like somebody, if I had to, they want you to share your content so other people can take your content and share it. And every now and then I'll get like somebody that'll pop on there that's like, hey, I noticed your profile. It looks like we would make a great we need to get to know one another. And I'm thinking that's probably how they end up doing that with the kids. And I'm an old guy, you know what I mean? But I figured that's probably how it starts, right? They're not going to just come out and go, "Hey, girl," or whatever. What's the common? I know you can't. They're all different, but what is one of the common things that you see? Something that people need to be aware of that you're seeing pop up on these internet or whatever, that
So
they're
one of the huge trends we've seen nationally is the rise in sextortion. I mean, this has just been something that's creeped up over the last couple of years as being a huge problem. Like Ray was saying, a huge unguarded flank, if you will. The cyber tips are nothing new. ICAC task forces stood up, early 2000s. Cyber tips have been coming in ever since. Bad, people online have reached out, solicited kids. What we're seeing now is the shift of West African countries, especially. It tends to be Nigeria and the Ivory Coast, having bad actors over there that are reaching out via social media means to young people, primarily teenagers, and initiating financially based sextortion. So rather than your creepy guy in the van, person who's sexually attracted to children online that's wanting pictures for sexual gratification, what we're finding is you've got these financially based offenders where their goal is to solicit the child for $100 in an iTunes gift card, $100 in Roblox, some kind of digital currency that they can then convert, sell on a secondary market, etc. And so it does go something kind of like what you just mentioned. Typical case might be we'll say a 14-year-old boy who has an Instagram account, and he's messaged by what he believes to be an 18-year-old female. And oftentimes it's I'll show you mine if you show me yours type of conversation, where the perpetrator, who purports to be an adult or another youth, if you will, who's slightly older, says, "I'll show you, my private parts if you show me yours." And as soon as those messages are sent, the child is in a bad position. The teenager's in a bad position because their image is being screen captured in the background. The bad guy is taking captures of their friends lists, if it's a social media type site that's got friends lists. And then the picture's sent, and within minutes, the bad actor turns around and extorts the child for money, saying, "Here's your friends list, here's your mom and dad, here's your school, and if you don't give me the money, I'm sending the image out to your friends, to your mom, to your dad, to your school." And tragically, the issue we found with this is it's resulted in a huge rise in teen suicides.
Yeah.
And what's super surprising to me, as a parent, but also as an ICAC investigator, is the victimology on this. Typically, our victims we think of as being young females, teenage females or younger females, prepubescent females oftentimes. And with this particular sextortion crime type, what we're seeing is victimology. It tends to be a mid to older teen boy or male child, usually very successful in school, all-American type athlete. They've got everything going for them, good grades, etc. And what happens is, in a matter of minutes and in a matter of hours, they go from being on the top of the world, top of their class, to having made a really dumb mistake. They don't feel like they can communicate with an adult in their life. And again, we've seen suicides, we've seen self-harm behaviors that ended up occurring in a matter of hours. And you look at the chat, and it's just tragic because it's somebody that's after $100 in gift cards, and it results in a young person's death. So
Yeah,
that's why we're trying.
Are they able to get any of these? Are they able to get any of these people and actually catch them over in the Ivory Coast?
Yeah. So Brandon Guffey, or it might be Duffy. I have to look up his last name. He's I think it's Guffey with a G. He's a congressman out of South Carolina. He's been one of the foremost advocates for legislation involving sextortion reform. And his son was tragically a victim of one of these cases. So I know there's been some efforts to work these cases, work in cooperation with the African authorities, both in Nigeria as well as Ivory Coast, to extradite back bad offenders. As you can imagine, the authorities, well, I guess the rule of law is not the same in an African nation as it is here. And also it's somewhat more difficult. Here you think of internet being traced back to a specific device. You think of internet being traced back to a specific residence oftentimes. And when you go to these African nations, what I'm told by our attaché's offices is oftentimes it's a series of computers in like a 2004 era internet cafe, only that's normal for them. So what we had, 10, 20 years ago is these internet cafes where you go in and rent internet time. That's still kind of commonplace there. So sometimes it's very difficult in isolating who the bad actor is, who the offender is, just based on some of the logistic and investigative hurdles that these African nations have.
Yeah,
I think, Jason, it's worth mentioning that because of these the uptick in the sextortion and these images that are out there, a lot of times these kids don't know what to do. And one of the resources that we have, and maybe Zach, you can speak to this in a little bit more detail than I can, but one of the resources that's offered up is the Take It Down. That is a powerful resource for kids that have images out there, whether they self-produce those images or whether, in most cases they did. They shared it with somebody that they thought they trusted. The next thing they're being exploited for that purpose. And Take It Down I think is a resource that's very valuable and worth talking about.
Yeah, so what that is, it's a voluntary program that your US-based service providers, again, Facebook, Instagram, anything owned by Meta, anything US-based, they participate in with conjunction with NCMEC. And I mentioned that hash value earlier. It's like a fingerprint for a file. The child can, or the young person, teenager, young adult, if they've got stuff from when they were younger, can submit that hash value to NCMEC to then be disseminated out to the various companies that are based in the US. And the companies have agreed that if they run across the file, they'll automatically remove it from their servers. So it's not 100%. It's not without issues, especially if there's files that are being shared on non-US based companies on a server that's overseas. But again, if it's one of your major social media providers, they're voluntarily participating in it, and they're trying to remove the content that these kids either intentionally or inadvertently end up posting online.
So for another department, now, Ray, you founded this organization, the Invictus Project. Did you base that off of somebody else in the nation, or was this something you were just like, well, I mean, was there anybody else that you kind of reached out to and you saw that they were doing this and you were like, I'm going to bring this back to North Carolina? And if so, and if you just did this on your own, I'm sure you're willing to get calls from other agencies throughout the country as to help them get something started like this, I'm sure.
That's one for you.
Yeah. So, this was something that I felt like, I struggled to take credit for it. Right. I know that when we were working internationally, an organization that I was working with internationally, we had this at the time. We were, the model was, we're going to go to these countries and help build these little task force so that when we come back there, we can have task force from other communities or other countries to be able to collaborate together to help do maybe an operation, if you will. And so I kind of took that model, and that's kind of the only model that I had in my head. And I'm like, how do we do that here domestically? And so I believe that there's an organization, Operation Lightshine. They have a very similar operation that or task force that they have done. They were very helpful in us kind of working through what this looks like. And ours is a little bit different because it's held at a local level. And our goal is to be proactive investigators. I'm not aware of another task force like this. They may be out there. I'm not aware of it. This just kind of came from me and some of the people that I was talking to within law enforcement, trying to figure out what's the solve to this puzzle, right? Because there's a lot of nonprofits in this space trying to help, trying to do something. And as you know, Jason, there's really no place for a civilian in any type of investigation, right? And so what's the solution? And one of the things that we identified very quickly is the biggest thing that that prohibits this work is manpower and money. And so we didn't invent any part of the resources or the tools or the tradecraft that law enforcement uses. These investigators that are part of our task force have been doing this for many years. What our vision was is let's bring them all together under one roof, expand that jurisdiction, and then ensure that they have all of the tools and resources that they need. We have plenty of investigators. Then we take all of that tradecraft, all of these investigative techniques that these seasoned investigators have garnered over the years, and then let's streamline that into a workflow so that we can help a new investigator in this space know, hey, here's the best practices on how to do that. And being partnered with our state SBI ICAC unit is absolutely paramount in this, because they help not only shape our workflow, but help disseminate that to our ICAC affiliates across the state. So it is definitely, I just felt like a lot of times I get the pat on the back, but I'm not the hero of this story, right? I'm just there to make sure that law enforcement has the tools and resources that they need to do this work. And in order to do that, I have to be intimately familiar with it. That's why I choose to stay active in the investigations, so I understand what our investigators are dealing with, how technology is advancing, and how law enforcement historically lags behind, and how do we get those tools and resources in the hands of those investigators when they need them, not waiting on the next budget cycle and hopefully it gets approved. Let's raise some money and let's get these tools in these guys' hands. Money should not be a reason why our children aren't safeguarded. I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
And so
right.
That's one of the things that I was very passionate about. That's why I was working internationally, but I'm like, man, what about right here? That was the number one question I was asked when I'd speak at churches and different things about the international side. They're like, hey, that's great. What about our kids? I'm like, wow, I guess call your local law enforcement. I mean, that was the answer. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah. I love that. Plus your guys, they cross over county lines and stuff like that. So they're right there, and if you don't, you know how it is. If you don't communicate with your next door neighbor, you're never even going to know that this guy's doing what he's doing. So I would think that there's ways that you can kind of categorize the number, like, oh, this guy's really off the hook and he's doing a lot of activity stuff. I would assume. So your sheriff there in Randolph County, I was really impressed with him. He seems like he's all in on this program. And of course, that's a big part of it, where he's committed to this. Obviously, when I watched him speak, I was impressed with him. And he's like, this is a big deal. Now, remind people what these predators look like.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that is surprising to probably most people that are watching this or listening is that, they have in their mind this idea that comes from a movie or really a social idea or a presupposition of what this creepy guy looks like. And what we know from our investigations is it's impossible to identify them by looking at them. You can't. They are pastors. They are teachers. They are coaches. They're sometimes law enforcement and firemen and your average citizen. And so it's impossible to identify them by looking at them. And we know that. And a lot of times they don't have any criminal record. It's pretty crazy. They could be anybody.
Yeah. And how receptive are the schools to have you? I mean, believe it or not, I have schools that reach out to me pretty frequently. They're like, "Hey, we want you to come and do a death investigation class," and I'm like, "Really?" I mean, it's always still kind of shocking to me because I'm like, "Okay, make sure that you have these parents sign waivers because I don't want to hear about you're showing my kids what So this is one of those things that I would think that you would have parents. It's like they know it's a problem, they know it exists, but yet nobody wants to talk about it. Do you experience that a lot?
Yeah, we found that in some cases. I don't think it's necessarily for lack of getting in the schools. We've been in several, but North Carolina public schools, they've got a vendor that they use for a lot of their continuing ed type credits. Again, one of these COVID type holdovers where you pay for a company to provide the continuing ed credits for human trafficking and sexual harassment, and the teachers are able to get all their check marks done for their continuing ed block for the year, and that provider ends up it comes down to a check mark sheet to get their whatever the requirements are under state mandates, right? We've got charter schools in North Carolina as well as private schools, again, churches. That seems to be more where we've seen the grassroots efforts, if you will, with getting these safety presentations done. And I don't think it's for lack of efforts and lack of interest in the public schools. I think it's more a function of what they're allowed to do, as well as who they're allowed to bring in. Again, one of the reasons we partnered with the Invictus Project for training, and one of the reasons the Invictus Project has partnered with us as a law enforcement entity, is government, is the credibility that creates, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a nonprofit organization that doesn't have that connection back to the official government organization of whatever jurisdiction you're in, they lack that credibility, especially for the public school system, especially for that government social service type structure. And so the charter schools look to us, and when they're calling the Invictus Project for safety presentations, it definitely speaks well that we're able to bring in an investigator and say, hey, these are sanctioned people, they're vetted, they're not some fly-by-night organization that's got bad intentions. We're here with them, and the curriculum they're bringing is again, it's good and it's vetted out.
I will also mention, Jason, that it's important to understand, our operating environment. We're in the South. We are in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And so we can offer a internet safety presentation for parents and children at a school in that setting. And you might have 15 parents show up, but you do it at a church and they'll be standing room only. So one of the things that we do is we leverage that partnership with our state partners, with our SBI computer crimes unit. They handle a lot of the internet safety curriculums in the schools and the presentations in the public schools. Mm-hmm. And they also sit on our task force with us. And so that partnership right there is so important, because we're able to, that just gives us access to the kids in school to be able to really educate them on what these dangers look like. But in that church setting and in these community settings, we did a community event in Asheboro a couple of weeks ago. And I think there was 300 people that RSVP'd to this. And then, we can shake the gloves off. We're not confined by any type of narrative, and we can really tell these parents, hey, this is what your children are facing, no doubt. So I think it's kind of a mix here. Our church presentations and community presentations in some of the larger churches have garnered a whole lot more traction than our school presentations, but our schools are very, very open and receptive to us. Of course, our Christian schools and charter schools, as Zach alluded to, they kind of roll out the red carpet for us and give us a pretty open forum, and we've had a ton of success. I think Whitney had compiled the numbers, and I think we spoke to over, I want to say 3,600 kids last year. So that's a pretty powerful number right off the bat. So yeah, we're definitely, I mean, that's the answer, right? That's the solution to this problem.
Yeah, that's great. And as a matter of fact, so for your officers, you're kind of in one of those areas. It's one of the rare areas in law enforcement. I'm surprised they don't do this more often. But do they evaluate you mentally to make sure that you guys are not getting warped?
Yeah, so that's a great question.
Great question.
That's one of the resources that HSI as a federal entity has been able to bring to the table. When the idea formation of the Invictus Task Force came about, that's something that really, unfortunately, it's not for anybody's fault. It's just the way it is. A lot of your ICAC affiliates are the one guy at the sheriff's office in the basement, in the one room where it's locked up 5 times because it's got digital evidence that can't go anywhere, but it's a windowless room that's, dark so he can do his computer work without getting a headache, but he's down in the dungeon by himself. And that obviously is horrendous for mental health. It's horrendous for retention. And you've got investigators that have not only years of experience, but tens of thousands of dollar signs behind their name because of the specialized training and curriculums, licenses that it takes to get these guys up and running, right? So we've got to do really well at retaining the people we have, not only because they're a person and that's the right thing to do, but also just from the standpoint of not losing that knowledge, that brain drain that you get when you have to hand over the reins to a new investigator. So our goal with the task force, and again, with HSI bringing to the table, HSI's got what's called the ARMOR program. It's our mental health resiliency that's housed in-house with HSI. But our clinician for our area just happens to be living in North Carolina. And he's been extremely generous in providing his contact information, as well as coming out and doing mental health resiliency training, box breathing, some of the, I guess your veteran cops would call it more frou-frou-y type stuff, but it really helps with focus and resiliency for the mind, right? We also have in the space, we've got what's called the Innocent Justice Project, Shift Wellness. And if you look them up, they've got a pretty good web presence with explaining what they provide to law enforcement. They're another 501c3 nonprofit. Their mission is to empower and assist ICAC investigators through mental health resiliency. The ladies over there are phenomenal. They're at different national conferences. They bring wellness toolkits with them. It's pretty cool. You go to a national conference for ICAC, you go into their wellness room, and they've got pipe cleaners and a bunch of little craft type items on the table where they're trying to get people decompress. And you've got 20 cops in there making little pipe cleaner creatures. And I never in a million years would have thought I would have seen that at a law enforcement conference. But when you've got guys that are literally looking at videos of children being violently sexually assaulted, for hours as a day, that's being like their main, investigative responsibility. It makes sense to me that the guy that's big and tough when he's at the search warrant, big and tough in the lab when he's having to put on that mental front, can go to a conference and then unwind a little bit by playing with a pipe cleaner animal thing that he made to have a little bit of steam to blow off.
It reminds me
tried to do well with resilience. What's that?
Well, it reminds me a little bit of those EMDR fidget toys that basically that is kind of one of my other guests that worked at the medical examiner's office, she has those beads and stuff that is there for that reason. So it's good that they're recognizing that, because it'd be interesting to me to see like a brain scan of a police officer when he gets on the police department, and then the various different jobs. Of course, everybody's different, but the different jobs as to how their brain scan would look like towards the end of a career of working like 10 or 15 years in a specific unit. For just out of curiosity, what kind of cops are you looking for? What's the cops that you like to kind of recruit, or what's the qualities, because we get cops that watch this from all over the country, and what are you looking for? What's the cop that stands out to you?
Yeah, we had this conversation earlier today, actually. It's kind of Just the future of the task force, retention, that kind of thing. We were spitballing things back and forth. I think for me, having now 15 years in law enforcement, since 2017 in ICAC, what I would say we look for, and Ray, please, if cut in if you think it's something different, a willing heart, right?
Yes.
But also that technological know-how, or at least willingness to learn, right? Ray mentioned how law enforcement tends to get behind the curve with technology, and we've got to stay ahead of that curve. That doesn't mean I've got to be the latest and greatest with getting on Snapchat and getting on the new app and the new app and new app, but I've got to have the familiarity, right? But at the same time, also, I've got to have those old school police skills, right? You got to have soft skills. It's so amazing to me, and from your work, the different styles of interviews. It is so different interviewing a child exploitation offender than it is interviewing a guy that you've got holding, 5 keys of, pick your drug. It's just a different interview. And then with child exploitation, you then oftentimes you're turning around, and not only are you dealing with suspects, but you then have to stare a family in the face and be able to have those interview skills to be able to talk to parents, talk to community members, talk to victims. And we're fortunate to have a very good child advocacy center that does our forensic interviews, as well as HSI that has a full-time forensic interviewer in our area. However, it doesn't mean we don't have contact with the victim, right? And so you're turning around and having that compassionate but firm conversation with your suspect, and then you're turning around and having that very compassionate, understanding conversation with your victim, and understanding where they've been through, and maybe having that empathy to know where they're at. So that would be what I would say we look for with new police officers, new people, investigators in this field.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that it's a mixed bag, right? I believe that you need youth in this space because they get things. They get the technology, they get the culture. They're closer to the age of our victims when they're being victimized. They understand that culture, especially on the proactive side. Very, very important. However, as Zach mentioned, they lack that experience. So I think having that mixed bag of folks that are, you need a seasoned person, right? Whether they're an investigator or not, that's just older and knows how to engage people, know how to talk to people, especially in these interviews. Because one of the things about our interviews, they almost always talk to us, and it's important that being able to have that victim-centered approach to a interview with these suspects is very, very important, because we're trying to identify, is there another victim out there that we don't know about, right? And so I think it takes just a whole lot of different personalities and skill sets and experience levels. But I think that the center, the nucleus of all of that is you have to have a heart for this. You got to want it because you want to help kids, not for any other reason, or you just will not make it through this process. I think we can agree on that.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. In some of these specialty units, you really have to care, and if you don't care, then you shouldn't be doing it. So, actually, I actually take it a step further, and I say, I know Amanda's wanting me to get off here pretty quick. I also take it a step further and say that if this doesn't affect you in some way, shape, or form, you probably shouldn't be doing this either. So, because you really should have a heart and be empathetic to who you're dealing with. Ladies and hey, I hope you guys had a good time. You see how quick that goes by? It's incredible.
That did.
It did. And I can tell you, I learned a ton, and I think we covered a lot of ground today, and we may have to have you back down the line. I'm going to be in North Carolina speaking. I'm hoping to be speaking at a couple of different homicide conventions out there in North Carolina. If that happens, I'll let you know. I'm going to be around. Maybe I'll get to meet you in person. And like I said,
we'll have better internet at that time, Jason.
That'll work. Hey, listen, everybody, thanks a lot for joining us. Stick around, guys. Don't just click out. We'll talk after this thing is over. And I want to thank everybody. This show is not a show without you joining us. It means the world to me, and it is such important work. Thank you, Sally. I agree with that. They're definitely talented in their field, and they're doing something very, very special. So I appreciate you guys. Well said throughout this interview. I really, really appreciate it. If you guys are looking for a speaker, guess what? They both do that. So if you're looking for that speaker, that's that crime prevention conference, they would love to come to your area. I have no doubt about it. So you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to the Invictus Project, or reach out to their LinkedIn. They're both on LinkedIn. So I encourage you that you do that. Man, what a great week. Thank you guys so much. Next week, we're going to have Billy Queen. Billy Queen, throw up Billy's picture real quick. Amanda, I know we're got to get off here. There you go. Undercover agent, one of the best ever. And Billy's going to talk about infiltrating the Mongols motorcycle gang. Like and subscribe. Yeah, it's going to be great. All right. You know it. He's a legend. And he's going to be talking about, he was a full patch member, by the way. He became a secretary/treasurer of the Mongols. So it's going to be really exciting. Thanks a lot, everybody. Amanda, take us out.